Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be part 2 of the Peter Michael Falk story. We're going to delve a little deeper into Colombo, Lieutenant Colombo from Robbery Homicide Division of Los Angeles, a television series that ran from 1971 until about 2003. Peter Falk started to have senile dementia symptoms around 2006. And then he passed away in 2011 on June 23rd, 2011 at 1004 North Roxbury Drive, Beverly Hills 90210, right off Benedict Canyon, on a gradual slope, not the pancake flats, but not the steeper roads of Angelo Drive and Cielo Drive and Summit Ridge Drive or Beverly Grove Drive or Benedict Canyon Drive off Benedict Canyon Drive, right? Cielo Drive off Cielo Drive. There's a couple of those. Cul-de-sacs off of the main named street, just like they do in Laurel Canyon with Natalie Wood's home, 7708 Woodrow Wilson Drive, off Woodrow Wilson Drive. Makes it kind of difficult to find the home when you're driving along Woodrow Wilson Drive and there is no 7708. You can spend your life going back and forth on that curvaceous road. You'll never find 778 until you peel off onto a cul-de-sac that happens to share the same name, and voila, there's the gate to a gated compound. Not that different than the Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger murder scene. It's a gated complex surveillance house off the main drag. So with respect to Peter Falk, what did we learn in part 1? Let's just revisit part 1 briefly and remind ourselves what we're dealing with here, because to coin a phrase from my most favorite Columbo detective episode, Identity Crisis, which was directed by Patrick McGoohan, who also starred in the film. Patrick McGoohan directed 5 Columbo episodes. He appeared and starred in 4 of the 5 episodes. The next most popular actor in Columbo was Jack Cassidy. He was married to Shirley Jones. He was murdered and done away with at age 49 in West Hollywood. Very close proximity to where Diane Linklater was murdered. She was murdered across the street from 1211 North Horn Avenue. And Jack Cassidy was incinerated, cremated in an apartment at 1211 La Cienega, just 2 blocks away from where the Comedy Store is. It's one block from the Comedy Store, and it's another block up to where Diane Linklater went face down into the sidewalk. Across the street from 1211 North Horn Avenue, which is a CIA apartment building where only CIA operatives stay there rent-free. Connie Monty was such a person. She was murdered 4 days after Diane Linklater through acute barbiturate poisoning in her bed in that apartment building, 1211. So there's a lot of symbolism here because Jack Cassidy appeared as the Great Santini, who was really Stefan Mueller, a Nazi concentration camp guard who escaped justice. This is always the Jewish narrative that is woven into the Holocaust, and that appeared in the Great Santini episode of Columbo. Whether it's a true story or not doesn't make any difference. The social engineering content is crystal clear. I do recommend you watch the Great Santini, which was a celebration of the Magic Castle located on Franklin Avenue, which is where Charles Manson lived for a short time. He lived across the street from the Magic Castle. That is where Janis Joplin was murder-suicided, overdosed. She lived on didn't live. She resided in an apartment hotel room where she was murdered across the street from the Magic Castle on Franklin Avenue. The reason I bring up Franklin is because Jack Cassidy's episode where Murder by the Book, he played a promotional fake author along with Martin Milner, who's a friend of Clint Eastwood's, in case you didn't know, from Fort Ord Army Base. That's where they met, along with David Jansen. David Jansen, whose real name is Meyer. He's a Jewish gentleman that died early in Malibu. David Jansen, Martin Milner, and Clint Eastwood. They were all pals in Monterey, Spooksville, USA, at Army Base Fort Ord. Walking distance from where Dr. Victor Oder was later murdered and massacred in Soquel. Very close. And in the episode Murder by the Book with Martin Milner and Jack Cassidy, the Jack Cassidy character was known as Ken Franklin. Ken Franklin, named after the street that the Magic Castle is located. Yeah. Anyway, just saying. I do recommend everyone go watch the Columbos because they're fascinating. There's social engineering messages in all of them. Hey, there's social engineering messages with all television programs. In so far as the detective series, Barnaby Jones with Buddy Ebsen, I didn't really get into that until later in life. I was very busy when that show was being broadcast. That was produced by the same person who produced Columbo. We all know about Richard Levinson, who's a Jewish man from Philadelphia. He's a creator of the television adaptation of the detective show Columbo, along with his partner William Theodore Link. Those two knew each other from junior high school in Philadelphia. They performed magic acts in junior high school together. Richard Leighton Levinson and William Theodore Link. They're basically 1 year apart in age. They're both Jewish. But the executive producer of Columbo was Philip Saltzman. He was the executive producer. He's a Jewish man via Mexico, whose family immigrated to Los Angeles from Mexico. And he went to UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. And he is the same age as Peter Falk. Peter Falk is 1 year older than Philip Saltzman, who is the executive producer of Columbo. He also executive produced Barnaby Jones, and he participated as a producer for The Fugitive with David Jansen, who again is friends with Martin Milner and Clint Eastwood. And my point is that Philip Saltzman is in close age to Peter Falk, whereas Richard Levinson and William Link, the creators of the Columbo adaptation, which was a play in New York City before it was a television show, people, they were 4 to 5 years younger than Peter Falk. So you should know that Peter Falk was the eldest person in the room at Columbo. And there's a lot of stories about how difficult he was about wanting to change his lines to make it more suitable to his character. And he was successful. But he annoyed a lot of people because he would have a lot of stop and starts because he didn't like the direction as portrayed by the professional people brought in to create the Columbo series. So I'm sure there were a lot of phone calls to Philip Saltzman at his office and to Richard Levinson and William Link that Peter Falk was a pest and a womanizer. That's what we learned in part 1, was that he was had a huge ego. He was only 5'6". He was a short man. He was chasing women all over the place whilst he's married. And he liked to drink Scotch whiskey, of course, and other types of whiskey. And he liked to smoke cigarettes, and he chewed that cigar on set for Columbo. What is important to note regarding the people behind the scenes that we generally don't talk about is that Richard Levinson died mysteriously of a heart attack at age 52 in his Brentwood home, which is on the west side of the San Diego freeway. William Link, who later moved into the Jose Menendez murder house not too long after it was cleaned up and remodeled in 1990. The murder happened in August 1989. The murders, professional murders, not by Lyle and Eric Menendez. They didn't do it. It's professional killers killed the king of porn, Jose Menendez. Well, I don't know that he was the king of porn, but he was an executive vice president and chairman of the board of Live Entertainment, which was the #1 porn producing company for Hollywood in 1989, the year that he was murdered. He had a $15 million life insurance that his employers held on his life. His children only had a $400,000 life insurance split between the two of them. You see? So if you're looking for life insurance as a motive, you have no further to look than Oliver Silverstein Stone's friends, Mario Kassar and Andrew Vodka, whose real name is Andres Weidman, Jewish, because they had $15 million reasons to murder Jose Menendez. The children did not. The sons did not. Not to mention that Lyle was attending Princeton University and never attended Beverly Hills High School, and Eric attended Calabasas High School, which is 25 minutes to the north. He never attended Beverly Hills High School. So any stories that you heard in the media that the kids were Beverly Hills brats is a total, complete lie. They never grew up in Beverly Hills. I don't think they knew very many people in Beverly Hills. But they were living in the garage unit. They weren't even living in the main house. I don't know where they're living, to tell you the truth, because I don't think they lived at that address, 722 North Elm Street, or Elm Drive, because it was a murder house, and it was the home to Elton John and Michael Jackson before it was the home to William Theodore Link, one of the creators for the Columbo detective series. Philip Saltzman had Russian-Jewish background. Barnaby Jones with Buddy Epstein, Buddy Epson, and Frank Cannon, Cannonball detective series. Lots of social messaging in those, but I didn't follow those as closely, and I don't think they were as deep as the Peter Falk Columbo series. But let me just go through some of the work. Let's have some fun with Columbo, right? Shall we? Let's review. I have a favorite episode, which is very difficult to pick because I loved all the Columbos, every single one of them. I mean, some were obviously better than others. But here's top 5 Columbos that I wouldn't disagree with these ratings. This isn't my top 5, but I'm going to read through them because these are all very excellent Columbo episodes. So there was an episode that, this is out of order. I mean, the first one, I thought, the first Columbo, which was a pilot, I thought that was incredibly good with Gene Barry as a psychiatrist. Okay, anyway, that's a message for all you CIA aficionados out there. Psychologists and psychiatrists are essential in all of these mind control operations, including the COVID operation. So a lot of psychological science going on with COVID. But A Friend Indeed, it aired May 5th, 1974. And this is where we have a corrupt commissioner of the Los Angeles Police Department. Now that's important because guess what? The commissioners of the Los Angeles Police Department are corrupt. Absolutely. As are the district attorneys. As is the mayor's office. So here's Columbo, showing you in Fantasyland a documentary about the corruption at the police department of Los Angeles. A Friend Indeed. Richard Kiley plays the deputy police commissioner, Mark Caperin, who helps establish an alibi for his rich friend, Hugh Caldwell, who has just murdered his wife, who's having affairs on him. Anyway, the police commissioner then kills his own wife, Margaret, and then forces his neighbor across the street, Hugh Caldwell, to help him make the murder look like the work of an unknown assailant, aka a Bel-Air burglar. because Bel-Air was suffering a series of burglaries at the time, so he wanted to make the burglar look like the murderer. Colombo, of course, finds contradictions and inconsistencies in both murders, which are just across the street from each other in Bel-Air. Sending you a little message here about Bel-Air, which we're going to circle back to. That was home to Ronald Reagan. You know, Ronald Reagan lived at 666 St. Cloud Road. I said that. 666. You should know if you Google it, it's not there anymore. They changed the address to 668 to get rid of that Masonic messaging. When Ronald Reagan resided in the home in 1989 until Nancy's death, the address was 666 St. Cloud Road. It's about 7/10 of a mile away from Art Linklater's address at 11 Bel-Air Road. And it's about a half a mile from the Beverly Hillbillies address, Jed Clampett at 750 Bel-Air Road. It's walking distance to the Ronald Reagan home, except there's no sidewalk, so it's kind of dangerous to walk that distance without a sidewalk because the street is narrow, the road is narrow, and cars speed. And just right across the street and down a steep cul-de-sac from Art Linklater is 11 Bel-Air Place. And who used to live there? Well, Julio Iglesias lived there as a provisional tenant. He didn't own the home. And when he moved out, Quincy Jones, you know Quincy Jones, he moved in. He moved into 1100 Bel-Air Place, which is off Bel-Air Road. It's kind of a play on Cielo Drive, off Cielo Drive, or Woodrow Wilson Drive, off Woodrow Wilson Drive, only here we call it a place. They don't do that with Natalie Wood, and they didn't do that with the Sharon Tate murder. They didn't call it Cielo Place, they called it Cielo Drive. And clearly it's not on Cielo Drive. If you want to find the crime scene, go up Angelo Drive, turn right on Sunbrook Drive, hit the brakes, park the car, look up the ice plant, you'll see the murder scene. Sunbrook Drive, where Timothy Leary lived, at 10106 Sunbrook Drive. Right 300 feet up the hillside is where Abigail Folger bled out on the lawn. I'm bringing this up on purpose, people. This is a military complex. Laurel Canyon, Coldwater Canyon, Truesdale Estates, the flats in Beverly Hills where Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood lived, and Doris Day lived, and Jose Menendez stayed for a few weeks, and Elton John lived, and Michael Jackson lived on the flats. And Peggy Lee lived over there before she moved to Bel-Air, and where Jack Benny lived, and Lucille Ball lived, and where Peter Falk lived in Benedict Canyon, aka Holmby Hills. It's military. It's all military designed. These homes were built in 1942. Most of them were. There's a few homes that were built in the 1920s. But the vast majority of homes in Benedict Canyon were built at the time that the Sharon Tate murder scene was excavated, which would have been in 1942 and 1943. The home that Peter Falk died in, which is 1004 North Roxbury Drive, that was built in 1942. And the neighbors to Peter Falk next door neighbor was Jack Benny. His next door neighbor to the north was Lucille Ball. So it was Lucille Ball, Jack Benny, Peter Falk. I don't know who was on the other side of Peter Falk. And I can't really call her fake name. I got to go with her birth name, Sherry Lynn Comiskey, who I think moved out of the house. I think it is being occupied by a celebrity WWE or mixed martial art boxer. Let's continue on with the Columbo episode. So in the film Friend Indeed, we have a corrupt Los Angeles police commissioner who kind of extorts and cajoles his friend for providing him an alibi in a quid pro quo concept. Okay, then we have Jack Cassidy starring in 3 different Columbo episodes, but Now You See Him was the Great Santini that was first aired on February 29th, 1976. This is not long before Jack Cassidy was murdered. This is another theme in Columbo. He had Harvey Lawrence appear with him as a chess master, and Harvey Lawrence died shortly after filming the Columbo episode where he was a European chess master. You may remember Harvey Lawrence. He appeared as the Manchurian Candidate, MK Ultra CIA murderer for John Frankenheimer's film Manchurian Candidate. And he starred along with Angela Lansbury, who's totally British intelligence CIA-controlled Angela Lansbury, who played the mother and control agent to her son, played by Harvey Lawrence. Harvey Lawrence attended the Sharon Tate, Roman Polanski fake wedding reception at the Playboy Club in London, as did Agnes Moorehead, who was the mother-in-law for Bewitched, with starred Elizabeth Montgomery. Elizabeth Montgomery was the friendly witch housewife. Samantha Stevens, married to Darren Stevens, and the difficult mother-in-law was Agnes Moorehead. Guess what? She was Peter Falk's neighbor, Agnes Moorehead, and she, along with Harvey Lawrence, attended the mandatory cocktail party for 2 hours on January 20th, 1968, in London, England, right next door to the Grand Sheraton Hotel, in the Church of Scientology Compulsion Analysis Division Playboy Club. 2-hour reception on a Friday afternoon. And it was not a real wedding. Sharon Tate never got married to Roman Polanski. They faked you out. If it was a real wedding, her CIA parents would have attended. Doris Tate was not present, and neither was Colonel Paul Tate. Sharon Tate's father was not present for that wedding reception, and there was no wedding ceremony. And there are no photos of any wedding ceremony, nor is there any paperwork on their marriage license. And you should know that the only people that attended that reception were required BBC and MGM actors who were paid to go to the cocktail party, along with MI6 spook British intelligence officers who do not appear in most of the pictures. And Jack Cassidy appeared as the Great Santini, who was trying to conceal his true name of Stefan Mueller, a Nazi concentration camp guard who had escaped justice to become a magician, who appears at the Magic Castle, which they renamed for the Columbo series. Trying to think here what they called it, the House of Magic or something like that. All right. You should know that Robert Duvall, who's all over these CI films, he also does a United States Marine Air film entitled The Great Santini, which this is Now You See Him. Columbo, they call it Now You See Him, but it features The Great Santini. Then Robert Duvall plays The Great Santini as a pilot for United States Marines. And that's done 3 years after this Columbo episode of Now You See Him debuts. The next Columbo episode that's in the top 5 is Double Exposure, starring Robert Culp, who also does 2 or 3 Columbos. And he was... Robert Culp is best known for co-starring with Bill Cosby, not to be confused with Bill Colby. Bill Cosby, the comedian, the black comedian, and they played I Spy for NBC. Anyway, Robert Culp is quite excellent in his role as a murderer. Double Exposure, where they talk about the subliminal cut, where you inject popcorn and some potato chips and a hamburger to get people viewing your film to want to go and get a soda or take a drink of water. It makes them thirsty due to the subliminal cut. And it is that technique where the murderer gets the victim alone through a subliminal cut of getting a cold glass of water. Etude in Black, one of my favorite episodes. It's not my number 1 favorite, but it's probably number 2, starring John Cassavetes, who's a personal friend of Peter Falk. John Cassavetes comes from a Greek background, also from New York, and he plays a symphony orchestra conductor whose name is Alex Benedict, like Benedict Canyon, right? And he's married to to Blythe Danner, who's Gwyneth Paltrow's mother. But he's having an affair with Jennifer Wells, who's the pianist, the Chopin aficionado, Jennifer Wells, the beautiful, beguiling Jennifer Wells, who's played by Jeanette Comer, and Jeanette Comer, and she's beautiful, but she tries to blackmail the Alex Benedict character into divorcing his wife, who's really rich and loaded, and not to mention that his mother-in-law owns the symphony, so he would be blackballed and unemployed from the Los Angeles performing arts if he ever did something like that. So he takes an ashtray and conks Jennifer Wells over the head while she's playing Chopin. She also has a parakeet by the name of Chopin. And it is that death of the parakeet that clues Columbo in that it was not a suicide that was typed with a typewriter. It was the maestro's murder. Anyway, it's a great one. Then we have Negative Reaction starring, of course, Dick Van Dyke. And he plays against his nice guy image, as the husband of Mary Tyler Moore, right? So he plays against his normal typecast image. He stars as a photojournalist, Paul Galesco, who then kills his nagging wife, Frances. She's played by Antoinette Bauer, and she's a real pain in the neck. Anyway, so he stages a hoax kidnapping in the same way that the Patricia Hearst kidnapping was portrayed. Very similar to Patty Hearst. Because I'm here to tell you that the Patricia Hearst kidnapping from the University of California, Berkeley campus off College Avenue and 2 blocks from the People's Park in 1974, it had to be a hoax. And the reason I say it had to be a hoax is, when was the last time you're with your fiancé, who's 7 years older than you, and you're taken against your will from your apartment, number 4, and you're taken to Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein's neighborhood in Presidio Heights, where you're held against your will and raped in a closet in Haight-Ashbury, right next door to University of San Francisco Jesuit. And you live there for over a year, and the FBI presumably is looking for you because it's a kidnapping, and they can't find you, and you're right in a Jesuit Catholic neighborhood of Presidio Heights, and you're on Masonic Avenue, for crying out loud. You're on Masonic Avenue. And the FBI can't find you, and you're walking distance to St. Ignatius de Loyola Parish and University of San Francisco University Jesuit Indoctrination Center, and you're walking distance to the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, and you're walking distance to Dianne Feinstein's home and Nancy Pelosi and Paul Pelosi's home, but nobody can find you for over 18 months. They can't find you. So I'm going to call that a fake kidnapping. Just like the Dick Van Dyke, Paul Galesco killing his wife but staging it as a kidnapping was fake. And Columbo wasn't buying the potato in the tailpipe. That's why I love Columbo, because he doesn't fall for the obvious potato in the tailpipe syndrome, which is what the COVID masking was all about. That's an obedience cult ritual. It's got nothing to do with public health. It has to do with psychological health, but not anything that's going to kill you from a virus. Chemtrails coming from above, that can kill you. That can cause you to get pneumonia. Don't put aluminum parts into your body. And certainly not into your lungs or your heart muscles or your testicles, ovaries, or breasts, or brain. Don't do it. You heard it here first, people. Don't put metal parts in your body. Don't do it. Hey, that's why I changed the oil in my motorcycles, because I don't like aluminum trailings zipping around the cylinder and the transmission. I'd rather flush it and put in high-grade synthetic oil. All right, what else can I tell you here? My favorite episode, of course, is Identity Crisis, which features Patrick McGoohan, who directs and stars in it. The movie begins with Nelson Brenner, who's the CIA operative, calling a hotel in Santa Monica in close proximity where William Holden is later murdered. William Holden is hit in the head with a baseball bat or something like that in a few years after this was aired with Columbo. Colorado is a river. He calls A.J. Henderson, who's played by Leslie Nielsen. This is before Leslie Nielsen did the Naked Gun series with O.J. Simpson and became a comedian. He was a dramatic actor before that. And this is, I believe, 1975. And Nelson Brenner, a.k.a. Patrick McGoohan, when the phone is picked up by A.J. Henderson, Leslie Nielsen, Nelson Brenner says, Colorado is a river. And then A.J. Henderson responds, Geronimo is an Indian. That's his code name, Geronimo. Nelson Brenner says, there is no beach like a Long Beach, an amusement park. Then Geronimo, A.J. Henderson, replies, when? Nelson Brenner says, in 2 hours. All right, so that's code for going to Long Beach and meeting up to discuss how much money Nelson Brenner has stolen from the A.J. Henderson character, Geronimo. Because, see, they had a little currency scheme going on down there in Banana Land. That's code for Guatemala, San Salvador, El Salvador, which paid the, Enos Mejia, Abigail Folger's grandparents had a land trust there. And that is where there's a big CIA drug facility in Honduras, which is adjacent to El Salvador and Guatemala. And this is coded message here that Nelson Brenner and Geronimo, A.J. Henderson, are CIA agents who have purloined tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars from a CIA drug operation in Central America. And it's time to give the share that was owed to A.J. Henderson. And instead, Nelson Brenner conks him on the head with a tire iron, in exactly the same way that William Holden was conked in the head in Santa Monica. The film depicts Santa Monica Beach, not Long Beach. They pretend that it's Long Beach, but it's filmed in Santa Monica, walking distance from where William Holden is eventually murdered and where the Church of Synanon was. It's the Santa Monica Pier. It's underneath the Santa Monica Pier. That's where Nelson Brenner murders A.J. Henderson, not his real name, Geronimo. All right? I can go on and on and on. There's so much CIA messaging in all the Columbos, and especially in Identity Crisis, where nobody is who they appear to be, or no one is who they say they are. I mean, A.J. Henderson isn't A.J. Henderson. He's Leslie Nielsen. And Nelson Brenner is Patrick McGoohan. And Peter Falk is Colombo. You see? You see how easy it is to fool people? That's what we're talking about here. But I want to tell you that the people who lived on North Roxbury Drive were Jimmy Stewart, Lucille Ball, Madonna, Ginger Rogers. She lived at 906 North Roxbury. Jimmy Stewart lived at 918 North Roxbury. Ricky Schroeder, I don't even know who he is. He was at 921 North Roxbury Drive. Eddie Cantor, he used to be the president of the Screen Actors Guild. Eddie Cantor, I think he was the second president after Frank Morgan's brother, Ralph. Ralph Morgan was the first Screen Actors Guild president, then Eddie Cantor. He lived at 1012, so just a few houses from the Peter Falk house. Jack Benny was at 1002. Peter Falk was at 1004. Lucille Ball was at 1000. Okay? Betty Grable lived at 1015 across the street from Peter Falk. Agnes Moorehead from Bewitched, she was at 1023. Spencer Tracy also lived in the house at 1023 before Agnes Moorehead did. Lionel Barrymore, who played the evil banker from the Jimmy Stewart film It's a Wonderful Life, he lived at 800 North Roxbury Drive. This, like I said, this is walking distance to where Ronald Reagan and Nancy Davis Reagan lived at 666 St. Cloud Road. Although you do have to cross over Beverly Glen Boulevard. So it's not that far as the crow flies, but that's a busy street, North Beverly Glen Boulevard. But it's walking distance. However, there's no sidewalks, which really keeps people sheltered in place. This North Roxbury Drive does have sidewalks. So it's the exception to the rule. Everyone I just mentioned, Lionel Barrymore, Agnes Moorehead, Betty Grable, Madonna, Jack Benny, Lucille Ball, Jimmy Stewart, Ginger Rogers, Jack Benny, they had sidewalks. Peter Falk had a sidewalk. Sherry Lynn Comiskey had a sidewalk. There's so much more. Suzanne Plachette in Deadweight, which is again a blueprint for the murder of Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood, who lived on the flats in Beverly Hills with Robert Wagner. That Deadweight was actually filmed in Balboa Island at 5 different locations at Newport Beach, Orange County. However, Natalie Wood was murdered out of Marina del Rey, Los Angeles County, as was Dennis Wilson, who was moored. His boat was moored there when Natalie Wood made her last journey down to Santa Catalina, where she was thrown into the cove like a sack of potatoes in November 28th, 1981. Dennis Wilson had a 58-foot yacht that Natalie Wood would have had to go past. Anyway, that was sort of memorialized in years earlier with Columbo's episode of Dead Weight, where the murder victim was thrown off Eddie Arnold's boat and then appeared a few days later. In the case of Natalie Wood, she was thrown off the Splendor, her 52-foot boat, into the ocean waters in November 28th, 1981, and then she was found around 9:30 in the morning, 6.5 hours later, same day, November 28th, 1981. So again, that can be traced back to a Columbo episode entitled Dead Weight, Natalie Wood story. I think it's bizarre that Ronald Reagan will be living at 666 St. Cloud Road down the hillside from Art Linklater, and I think it's disturbing that he's half a mile or less from Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, who lives on Bellagio Drive. Trying to see that address here. You should know that of all the people that I've studied in my videos, nobody has lived in more residence than Charlie Manson, whose real name is Charles Miles Maddox, and Ronald Reagan. Those two lived in a minimum of 12 different nice homes. Charlie Manson and Ronald Reagan, they have the record. Art Linklater only lived in a couple of homes. Peter Falk only lived in a couple of homes. Cass Elliot lived in 4 homes. Cass Elliot. Abigail Folger only lived in 1 home. Frank Zappa lived in 2 homes. Charlie Manson lived in 12 homes. Ronald Reagan lived in 12 homes. They both lived in Pacific Palisades. Charlie Manson did, so did Ronald Reagan. They both lived in Bel-Air. Ronald Reagan lived at 666 St. Cloud Road, and Charlie Manson lived for a month and a half in Brian Wilson's home on Bellagio Road, which is walking distance to Ronald Reagan's house. And they lived there at the same time. When Ronald Reagan was governor, he had that house address. Ronald Reagan and Charlie Manson were 0.4 of a mile away from each other in Bel-Air in 1969. Just saying. Everybody knows each other. And we focus on, the names like Charlie Manson or Ronald Reagan or Art Linklater or Peter Falk. But guess what? The other homes are the producer, directors, or people like Rupert Murdoch, for example. Okay? Because who lives at the 750 Bel-Air Road, Beverly Hills mansion? Well, that's Rupert Murdoch's son owns it now. And before that, it was the guy that founded MCA, Music Corporation of America. He lived there. And that is a straight shot, 600 meters to where Sharon Tate was murdered. Right out the back. So that's a surveillance home. That's my point. So Columbo episodes all had social engineering, CIA blueprinting in your face. Nobody was who they said they were. And years after those Columbo episodes, people are murdered in the exact blueprinted way that were shown to you in advance from Columbo. And I can go on about the Beverly Hillbillies because that's true in that television sitcom too, about private banking and how Your banker lives next door to you and surveils you 24/7. That's what central bank digital currency is. That's what Milburn Drysdale was as the president of the Beverly Hills Bank of Commerce. And he's living next door. He's supposedly living next door to Jed Clampett at 750 Bel-Air Road, which is walking distance from Peter Falk's house. Thanks for listening. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.